Russia thought that its slow and steady rate of advance would win the Ukraine war. It had no intention of being the hare in this race. Russia was more than happy to be the tortoise, albeit one that moved so slowly that even that famous reptile would blush. Ukraine just broke the tortoise's shell. Using a brand new assault tactic, Ukraine has just ripped through the Russian front in Zaporizhzhia. It achieved a 3.5-kilometer breakthrough in one brutal push that will have Vladimir Putin wondering what on earth just happened. News of that push comes from United 24 media, which said on October 12th that Ukraine's specially created assault troops have done exactly what they were designed to do. They've pushed back against the Russian defenses, applying so much pressure that those defenses broke so thoroughly that Ukraine was able to liberate a village. That village is Mali Shcherbaky, which is now hosting the Ukrainian 24th Separate Assault Battalion, also known as IDAR, which operates alongside Ukraine's 33rd Separate Assault Regiment. Together, those units destroyed the Russian forces in Mali Shcherbaky so decisively that they were able to roll into the village and once again raise the Ukrainian flag. We see that in a reel shared on Facebook, which announced Mali's liberation along with a message. Units of the 24th Separate Assault Battalion IDAR, together with their brothers-in-arms from the 33rd Separate Assault Regiment, raised the Ukrainian flag in the settlement of Mali Shcherbaky in the Zaporizhzhia front, the post declared. The settlement is under the control of the Defense Forces of Ukraine. The post hailed the coordination of the two units involved, which we can see in the use of the Ukrainian word pobratimami. This word loosely translates to brothers-in-arms, showcasing that Ukraine's new assault strategy is bonding these troops better than ever before. Russia may attack in uncoordinated waves to get results. Ukraine counters Russia's gains through teamwork, dedication, and an ability to unleash coordinated hell on its opponents. Remember the name Shcherbaky too. We'll be coming back to that in a moment. For now, there's a certain level of extra symbolism attached to Ukraine's act of raising its flag in the recaptured village. Such an act is common, of course. Raising a flag has always been a symbol of victory. However, Ukraine may have just used this opportunity to counter something Russia has been doing with increasing frequency in recent months: infiltrating villages to falsely raise flags even though Russia hasn't captured anything. We need only take a look at what happened at Stepove to see that new Russian tactic in action. At the beginning of October, Russia claimed that its troops had captured the small village. This is the settlement of Stepove that is in the Dnipropetrovsk region of Ukraine, rather than its more famous cousin in the Zaporizhzhia region. Russia was lying, as the handful of its soldiers who entered Stepove were destroyed by Ukraine within minutes. Russia's propaganda play with the fake flag raising is explored in one of our videos, so check it out if you want to learn more. But you only really need to know two things. Russia fakes its flag raising, Ukraine does it because it recaptures territory. Further confirmation that Mali Shcherbaky is in Ukraine's hands comes from Colonel Valentin Manko, who leads the Assault Forces Directorate of the Armed Forces of Ukraine. In a Facebook video, he confirmed that the Mali Shcherbaky assault was a success, in addition to adding some extra information. Manko says that Ukraine also managed to clear the nearby and the similarly named village of Shcherbaky during its assault, which is why we told you to remember the name. Plus, Ukraine's assault troops also managed to partially liberate another small village named Stepove, making October 12th an extremely productive day for Ukraine as it attempts to push deeper into occupied parts of Zaporizhzhia. A productive day for Ukraine is a very bad day for Russia, and Manko explained just how bad. The village clearances and liberations were part of a concerted Ukrainian push into Zaporizhzhia that saw it regain a large amount of territory in a single day. As Euromaidan press reports, Ukraine managed to move 3.5 kilometers forward into Zaporizhzhia along a 5-kilometer line of the front. That amounts to a 3.1-mile-wide contingent of Ukraine's forces pushing just over 2 miles into Zaporizhzhia, demolishing Russian forces as they went, and perhaps setting the stage for more assaults in the future. This wasn't just a very bad day for Russia, it was outright painful. As CNN reported on October 1st, Russia was already having to deal with the pace of its advance slowing substantially following a summer offensive that failed to achieve any of the objectives that Putin had outlined for his troops. September saw Russia take just 259 square kilometers of Ukraine for the entire month, which amounts to about 100 square miles. That was 44% less territory than Russia managed to occupy in August, which brings us back to what Ukraine just achieved. Russia advancing slowly means that every piece of territory it gains is like gold dust to Putin, as he attempts to create the perception that Ukraine can't stop Russia from winning the war. When Russia loses territory to Ukraine's counter-assaults, that perception is shattered. Mali Shcherbaky just proved that Ukraine is just as capable of taking terrain as Russia, and with Ukraine's new assault strategy, this may just be the beginning of Putin's problems. We'll revisit the topic of Ukraine's new assaults later in the video, but before that, the recapture of Mali Shcherbaky and the surrounding villages will hurt Russia for another reason, as Euromaidan Press points out. It says that Russia had only managed to reach the outskirts of Mali Shcherbaky and the surrounding villages as recently as March 2025, following a push into the nearby settlement of Pyatikati. That March push had allowed Russia to advance 4 kilometers deep into Ukraine across a 10-kilometer front line. Ukraine struck back, the outlet says, retaking Shcherbaky in the process, but the village was subjected to a counter-assault by Russia in July, leading to Russia seizing the territory that Ukraine had mostly just regained. So this wasn't any old counteroffensive by Ukraine. It was the period at the end of a run-on sentence that was being written as back as far as March of this year. The back and forth over these villages is over, at least for now, and it's Ukraine that has come out on top. On the surface, what Ukraine achieved on October 12th may look fairly small. Liberating a couple of villages is great, as is managing such a deep push through the Russian lines, but it still all amounts to a fairly small amount of territory. However, taking a wider view of the Ukraine war reveals that Ukraine liberating Mali Shcherbaky is just one part of a much larger trend happening all across the country right now. Ukraine is on the counterattack, and it's been slowly clawing its territory back from the occupying Russian forces for months. We only need to look at what's happening in Dobropilya and Donetsk right now to see that. On October 10th, United 24 media reported on comments made by the Ukrainian army's commander-in-chief, Oleksandr Syrsky. Those comments were made during a field visit 2 days earlier, with Syrsky revealing that a full Ukrainian counteroffensive is happening as we speak. In Dobropilya, Ukraine has managed to liberate around 180 square kilometers, or about 69.4 square miles, all as a result of Ukraine's increasingly effective assaults. In Donetsk, the liberation is going even better. About 212.9 square kilometers have been liberated in that sector of the war, Syrsky says, which amounts to around 82 square miles. So what we saw on October 12th isn't an isolated incident. It's Ukraine continuing an approach in Zaporizhzhia that has already been proven to work in Dobropilya and Donetsk. Russia is claiming settlements with limited numbers of troops, and Ukraine is starting to make it pay with its counter-assaults. This is happening all across the country, and the retaking of Mali Shcherbaky may just be the first in what is soon to become a long line of liberations that will leave Putin fuming. This isn't what the fall of 2025 was supposed to look like. The season was supposed to be one of celebration after Russia took enormous amounts of territory during the summer. Instead, Ukraine is reversing every gain that Russia made during the summer, forcing Putin even further away from the goals that he'd already failed to achieve earlier in the year. All of this is being made possible by something we mentioned earlier in the video. Ukraine has new assault tactics, and the numbers show us that these tactics are working. In its report on what Ukraine managed to achieve in Mali Shcherbaky, Militany summed up what Ukraine is doing differently with its assaults, which allows it to regain so much territory. It reports that Ukraine has assault troops that it's now using as a tool to break through Russia's defenses and mobile reserves in several regions. In all cases, these assault troops are experiencing so much success because of a change in tactics being operated by Russia. The Moscow Times reported on these changes back in September, noting that Russia is trying to use what the outlet calls sabotage groups to penetrate deep through the front. It quotes Syrsky, who says, "Since the beginning of summer, there has been a change in the enemy's tactics. Their main task is to penetrate as deeply as possible into our territory, to withdraw, regroup, and advance again. Then attack targets deep inside to paralyze our logistics and troop rotations." Militany adds that these Russian units can be as small as 4 or 6 soldiers, with Russia's goal seeming to be to sneak its troops through the front lines rather than fully break them. It's an approach that works. Sort of. Russia is indeed managing to claim small settlements and other scraps of territory with these sabotage groups. The fact that these Russian units are so small also means they can make so many small gains that it all adds up to numbers that look fairly impressive on the surface. However, the downside of Russia's approach is being exposed by Ukraine right now. Small units aren't able to really entrench themselves in a territory to erect the kinds of defenses that can stop Ukraine from counterattacking. Russia's infiltration units aren't backed by armor, and the holes they punch into the front lines are so narrow that Ukraine is able to close them quickly. Once the holes are closed, Russia's soldiers are encircled and prevented from gaining access to supplies or reinforcements. Ukraine launches its assaults. Russia's forces lose the territory they had claimed. Ukraine has created a brand new branch of its military to conduct these territory-regaining assaults, and it works differently from the Air Assault Forces, or DSHV as Syrsky explains. The Air Assault Troops are an elite infantry unit that can attack, defend and raid, the Ukrainian army's commander-in-chief says. And assault units are rapid reaction units. They operate where it's most difficult, do not have fixed defense lines and are called upon to break through the enemy's first line. Russia wants to infiltrate. Ukraine is now countering with small units of its own that react in real time to every advance that Russia makes. Writing in his Medium column, The Strategic Edge, Former US soldier and federal agent Brian Eislin goes into even deeper depth on Ukraine's new assault forces. He says that Ukraine has built a mobile reserve that is free-flowing and active in all parts of the country. That reserve is designed specifically to break Russian defenses, particularly in regions where Russia has made gains as a result of its use of smaller units. These assault forces aren't fighting with the rest of Ukraine's troops. They're not battling on the front lines or defending against Russia's advances. Instead, they're dedicating themselves to launching attacks, and they've been exceptionally successful over the last couple of months. The retaking of Mali Shcherbaky is just the latest in a long line of examples of these new assault forces being used. Eislin says that several Ukrainian outlets have reported that these new assault forces all work by the same blueprint. Small assault groups, lots of night work, flanking rather than frontal pushes, and immediate handoffs to heavier units once the door is open, is what Ukraine is doing, according to Eislin. That may sound familiar. Russia is trying to do the same thing, only it's been failing. We mentioned earlier that Ukraine has made cutting off the gaps on the front lines that Russia's infiltrators create a part of its strategy. Without those gaps, Russia can't send reinforcements or heavy units it needs to make its gains more permanent. Ukraine doesn't have that problem. Its assault groups are doing the same thing that Russia's groups are doing, only they have the muscle backing them up to make it work. Perhaps this is a symptom of Ukraine's defensive posture versus Russia's offensive one. Russia may not be able to make its new strategy work because it's stretching itself too thin with its offensives, and as United 24 media noted in October, Russia has already burned through most of its armor. Russia's heavy units may not be coming because they're simply not there. Ukraine, on the other hand, appears to have the heavy units it needs, and its assault groups succeed because they're supporting the defenses behind them rather than acting independently. Yes, the assault groups are roaming around Ukraine, however, they're being deployed in specific areas where recaptures are possible, as was noted all the way back in the 24th Separate Assault Battalion's Facebook post. Ukraine's assault groups are coordinating with their comrades to ensure that every recapture sticks. Supporting Ukraine's new approach to assaults is a shift in how the country trains its infantry. The Kyiv Post highlighted this in an October 10th report, where it said that these changes in training have come about because the Ukraine war battlefield is evolving. The outlet points out that drones have become the main threat in the war, which has resulted in infantry units often staying inside fortified trenches rather than launching the all-out assaults they had in the past. This is a challenge that affects both sides. As Army Technology notes, drones are now responsible for up to 80% of the casualties in the war, making the sort of large assaults Russia used to favor a near impossibility. There are just too many unmanned vehicles ready to take out troops and armor to make those types of assaults viable from a manpower and equipment perspective. Ukraine isn't immune to this proliferation of drones, as Russia is using plenty of fiber optic and first-person view drones of its own, hence the small Russian infiltration units and Ukraine's similarly small new assault groups. Still, infantry has to recapture territory, the Kyiv Post notes. That's one of the few things that drones can't do, at least not yet. The outlet notes that Ukraine's new infantry training has transformed how the country approaches infantry-based warfare. Obvious changes come from changes in weaponry. Ukraine's forces no longer train using the old Soviet-era weapons they used to in the past. Western-style weapons are now the norm, and Ukraine is using these weapons to make its soldiers more effective. As a soldier with the call sign Chasik tells the Kyiv Post, the guys have become higher level, both on the range and in combat. They've become more, effective. Without training, it will be extremely difficult in battle. More effective soldiers also lead to better coordination. Ukraine's main training now has its infantry units working in small groups. They fire from various distances before retreating to a work location. These drills seem to be custom-made for Ukraine's new assault forces. Those small units are getting in, firing on and taking out Russian troops, and then withdrawing to allow Ukraine's heavier units to retake territory. Accuracy combined with speed is what Ukraine's infantry training aims for, and we're starting to see the impact of its approach on the battlefield. Ukraine is using these new tactics for defense as well as offense. The Kyiv Post spoke to another soldier with the call sign Shambhala, who explained more. Each exercise is about survival, both for each of them and for the group as a whole. A small group can inflict much greater damage than an entire infantry company. Our training principle is called lone soldier in the field, Shambhala says. One person, moving, knowing, camouflage, knowing the technical characteristics of his weapon, reading the enemy's intent, can strike, withdraw, strike again, withdraw again, so we can hold back the enemy with a small, mobile, survivable group. Once again, Ukraine is showing its ability to adapt to everything that Russia tries. The very training tactics that Ukraine uses to aid its defense now appear to be what its new assault groups use to retake territory. Coming back to Mali Shcherbaky, Ukraine will also be happy to reclaim any territory in Zaporizhzhia because of what Russia is doing at the nuclear power plant in that region. Russia managed to capture this plant near the beginning of the war, and it's held it ever since. Now it seems that Russia is trying to cut that plant off from the Ukrainian grid, and it's succeeding. As the Kyiv Independent reported on October 12th, Russia has taken the unprecedented step of deliberately breaking the connection between the Ukrainian power grid and the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. There was no intelligent decoupling that happened here. It appears that Russia managed to cut the cord literally by striking a power line on September 23rd. Since then, the plant has been operating on backup diesel generators. This is incredibly dangerous and seems to be a sign that Russia is attempting to connect the plant to its own power grid, as Ukraine's Foreign Minister Mali Shcherbaky said in an X post. Not only is this an attempted theft of a peaceful Ukrainian nuclear facility, unauthorized actions of Russia's state nuclear energy corporation Rosatom violate internationally recognized nuclear safety protocols, contradict Ukrainian license, and directly threaten a nuclear incident, Shcherbaky proclaimed. These Russian actions place Mali Shcherbaky in a new perspective. This may seem like one small village in Zaporizhzhia that Ukraine has managed to liberate, but in the grander scheme of what's happening in the region, a 3-kilometer push forward across 5 kilometers of the front line is an important step in the right direction for Ukraine. It brings the country's forces just a little bit closer to a nuclear power plant that Russia is mistreating to the point where it could create a nuclear catastrophe. Ukraine can't allow that to happen. That's why its assault groups will likely start working even harder in Zaporizhzhia in the coming months. Ukraine's new strategy is working elsewhere, including in Dobropilya and Donetsk. But it may just be in Zaporizhzhia where Ukraine has to push the hardest to stop Russia from making one stupid mistake too many with a nuclear power plant. Ukraine's forces may soon be supported by a new type of drone that will do even more damage to Russia's defenses. AI-controlled drone swarms may now be on the horizon after Lithuania gave Ukraine an insane experimental weapon. Find out more in our video, and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for more videos covering Ukraine's latest adaptations to Russia's tactics.